This meeting is now being recorded.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining us. For those of you who have not been a part of this before, we do this webinar series about every other month on the second to last Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern on a variety of education topics. If you are a CLPHA member and you received this from a colleague and would like to be added to our listserv, please do send me an email at abra@clpha.org. For the rest of you, if there are any non-housing authorities on the line, then thanks for joining us. We hope it is useful for everyone. So we do record these webinars so that if you want to refer back to something at a later point or you want to share it with a colleague, you can do that. Hopefully, it seems like no one had any technical difficulties joining today, but if you did have any concerns, please let us know so that we can address those for you. Everyone should be seeing a tree or other nature scene right now. Don't worry, when the presentations are ready to start, you'll see those on your screen instead. I've gone ahead and muted most of you, but to help minimize background noise, if you can go ahead and mute yourself on your phone, then that will be helpful. If you do have a question, what we are asking folks to do, and you can go ahead and do this at any time, you don't need to wait until the presentations are over, you can have two choices. You can either use the public chat box section you can find in the lower left-hand area of the screen. If you type in there, everyone will see your question. So, if that's not okay with you, your other option is to use the Q&A button, which is the two chat bubbles, the orange and the gray, up in the top sort of right-hand area of your screen. If you click there, you can, only the hosts of this webinar will be able to see your question. So we will take time after each presentation to do questions specifically for those. And if for some reason we're not able to get to your question, then we will make sure to get it answered for you after the webinar is complete. So with that, I think I will turn things over to Kathy Brooks, who is the wonderful facilitator of this education working group with the Chicago Housing Authority. Kathy?
Yep, great. Thanks, Abra. Again, this is Kathy Brooks. I'm from CHA. I've been able to sort of facilitate for the past year, and it's been a real pleasure. And I think one of the best things about this forum is that we get to hear both individually from a housing authority as well as from either an industry perspective as well. So first, we're actually going to go ahead and have Atlanta Housing Authority and Elon. But we're going to pull your presentation up and hear more about your scholarship program.
Thank you, Cass.
Just briefly, like Abra said, you can go ahead and put your questions in public chat or Q&A, and we'll address those at the close of each presentation.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Elon Osby, and I am part of the Corporate Communications, External and Governmental Affairs team here at Atlanta Housing Authority. I manage several projects and events for the agency, one of which is our scholarship program. AHA Scholarship is the Atlanta Community Scholars Award, or usually referred to as ACSA. I'd like to share our scholarship program with you today. The first slide we're looking at, the Atlanta Community Scholars Award is a 2003 initiative of Atlanta Housing Authority. The United Negro College Fund, UNCF, serves as the program's fiscal agent. Funding for the scholarships comes from our workplace giving campaign, and those are pledges from the employees. The purpose of the ACSA is to provide scholarships to eligible AHA-assisted residents between the ages of 16 and 30 to attend a college, university, or technical school of their choice. The goal of ACSA is to encourage more AHA-assisted youth to consider and pursue higher education. Encouraging lifelong learning is an integral component of AHA's vision for building healthy, mixed-income communities and encouraging individual self-sufficiency. Scholarships are renewable for an additional 3 years if they have maintained a 2.5 GPA and are awarded without regard to race, religion, gender, color, national origin, disability, or familial status. All candidates for the scholarship must participate in the application process and meet established criteria and submit all required documentation, which is stipulated in the application package. All awardees are chosen by an official selection committee, which is made up of members from the private sector and is advised by a UNCF representative. Okay, the next slide, this is the cover of our application package, and we have started using one of our scholars. This is Amanda Harrison, who graduated in 2014. And so this is the cover for our application for this coming year. Our process starts actually in December. We send letters out to the households that have students between the ages of 16 and 18. This is the guidelines and the description, the criteria of the scholarship, and if I need to slow down about anything, please let me know that. This slide is the documents that we require students to submit. And then this is the actual application that they have to fill out. And there are 3 pages to that. Okay? And the final slide, during the 2016-17 academic year, the ACSA Scholarship Program awarded a total of $50,900 to 28 deserving AHA-assisted students. Our average applicant number is between 21 and 25. This was a big year for us. To date, we have awarded 127 ACSA scholars. Scholarship amounts are determined based on a need and have ranged from $300 to $5,000. Our scholars are attending or have graduated from such schools as Agnes Scott College, the University of Georgia, Morehouse College, Johnson C. Smith University, Benedict College, Georgia State University, Emory University, the University of Georgia, Howard University, Fisk University, College at Wooster, Tuskegee University, Roosevelt University, and Atlanta Metropolitan College. In addition to Atlanta Housing Authority's ACSA scholarship, we make available to our participants scholarship opportunities with 3 other housing organizations that we are affiliated with. Public Housing Authorities Directors Association, known as FAFSA, the Georgia Association of Housing and Redevelopment Authorities, known as GARA, and Housing Authorities Insurance Group, which is known as HAIG. And I have one other piece of information for you. The total number of households that Atlanta Housing Authority serves is 8,027. The number of households with students between the ages of 16 and 18 is 1,754. We send out 2 letters once the, scholarship season begins. We send out a letter in December which announces the ACSA scholarship and also the FAFSA scholarship. And then in January, we send another letter to those households which announces the GARA scholarship and the Hague scholarship. In addition to those letters, the announcement is also included in our newsletter, which is quarterly, and then we put the applications and links and all the information on our website, and it's also on our Facebook page. And that is the end of my presentation.
Great. Thank you so much. So for those listening, feel free to put those questions in public chat or the Q&A. We have one from Maria already saying that, do you allow the scholarships to be used at a community college?
Yes, we do.
I was also curious, as another housing authority that has a scholarship program, how did you decide, I think there's some interesting points about your scholarship program, to be renewable and to be need-based, because it obviously changes the scope and size of your application process every year. Were those conscious decisions, or was that something that you've just sort of continued year over year?
Those decisions were made before I started managing this. I think some of you all know Sean Atkins. Sean Atkins played a big role in taking the ACSA scholarship to another level. And I can find that out, but I think that I'm pretty sure that it was a conscious decision. Our students have a need, of course, as you would know, more so than other students. And we have to look at the amount of funding that we have, the number of students that we have, and the only way to balance it out, we had to find out what other grants and scholarships and loans that they may have, and then try to fill in that gap. And that's where the need comes in.
Great, thank you. And Lanita Wheeler posted another question. Are there any workshops hosted that assist with college application, financial aid, and admissions process? So are there other benefits or support services outside of the application process?
Other than me working directly with each student and their parents, there is not. At one time we had a program, we called it Brighter Futures Day, and we brought our students in to hear from recruiters, to talk to there's an academy for scholarships, and we had them to come in. We allowed them to go into our computer lab and apply for grants and loans and different things and scholarships. And because of a change in departments, that went to another department. We are considering bringing it back, and we're going to try to do that this year in this particular scholarship season. We're hoping to do that.
Great, thank you. Seeing another question come in from David. How big of a role do local school districts play in promoting awareness for the scholarship? So outside of your letters, are there other avenues that it's being promoted?
Yes. We have a database of high school counselors and senior advisors, and all of the information that we have regarding our scholarship and the other scholarships that we're associated with goes to that group. And then I actually have, one-on-one conversations with them. They've been very responsive in reaching out to our students and helping them with getting the applications. Last year I even had a counselor who brought the application to me herself because the student had a full load in school and they were working. And so they actually delivered the application. And so they're very supportive of this. We appreciate them, and we're just going to try to enhance that relationship between us and the counselors in the years to come.
Great. And I know you mentioned in your presentation that it is funded by staff support and staff funds. Can you talk a little bit more about the fundraising side for it?
Okay. Atlanta Housing Authority participates in United Way's Workplace Giving campaign each year, and one of the choices that the employees have is to make pledges to the UNCF ACSA scholarship program, and we do a couple of things to introduce our scholars to the employees, and we get a really good response from them in pledging to that particular fund. And in addition to the pledges from our employees, we have properties that we rent to different companies. As you all probably know, Atlanta has become a second Hollywood, and a lot of companies come in, film companies come in, and they rent our properties. and those funds that come from those rentals are deposited into our scholarship fund.
That's great. Thank you for the additional information. I also had one additional question as well. You mentioned that there is an age limit of 30. How did you come to that age limit, or was that just a guiding part of creating the program?
I'm sorry, I don't know the actual answer to that. That was decided before I came. I can get the answer for you and send it to Aubrey, and she can share it with you. I think part of it is because we have students who are just getting their GED, and if they are still within that age limit, they can get a GED, and then they can still go to college, and they're eligible for our scholarship.
Okay, great. Sorry. From our scholarship program in Chicago, we're seeing a lot of returning adults and a lot of head of households. So that's why I was just curious to hear more about that age limit and how that was put to. So if there is additional information, I'd love to understand more.
Okay. All right.
And this is Abra. Elon, do you happen to know how many of your scholars end up completing college or graduating?
Of the 127 scholars that have been awarded scholarships over the years, we have approximately 39 known graduates. We know that it's more than that. It's really hard to get them to respond to us and let us know that they've graduated or that they're going on to graduate school. And on a yearly basis, I send emails to our students, the ones that would have reached a point of graduating, to try to find out their status, not only if they've graduated, but what are you doing now? Are you working? Are you married? Do you have children? Just what? And it's very, very hard to get that response back from them. I don't know if some of it may be due to emails changing, cell phone numbers are changing, but so far I've only been able to identify 39 students, and we definitely are trying to track that because it's very important to know the result of these funds that we're putting out there for these students.
Great. And I'm going to go ahead and post a poll for you all, just wondering if folks on the line can give us an indication of how many of your housing authorities have a scholarship program. So if people can just take a minute or two to fill that out.
And if there's any other questions, feel free to post those in the chat or the Q&A. Thanks.
Okay, so just take one more second if you want to participate in the poll. Okay, and I think folks should be able to see those results, but we had 8 people say yes, they do have a scholarship program with our housing authority, and 6 people say no. So pretty good spread. If there are any final, and I just got one person coming in through email participating saying yes, they have a program, but they weren't able to participate in the web poll. So 9 total, 9 yeses, 6 nos. So if there are any final questions about maybe challenges that you've had with your scholarship program, either existing or you've tried to get it off the ground and you've encountered obstacles to that, now would be a great time to ask any of those lingering questions, or if you have a final thought that you'd like to share about what's been successful.
Opera, one thing I'd like to share, if anyone would like to have a conference call with myself and or Sean, I'll be glad to schedule that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so if folks, do want to take a line up on that offer, you can be in touch and I can connect you. Otherwise, if there aren't any other questions, I think we will keep moving on. So I saw that early on we did have a question around financial aid. I think, yes, it was Oakland that was asking about that process. So I'm excited to introduce Emily, who's with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So Emily will be able to tell you much more than I can, but the department has recently been working with other federal agencies, including the Department of Education, to match some of that FAFSA, the federal and financial student aid data, specifically to public housing authority residents. So, Emily, are you there?
I am.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and pull up your slides.
Awesome. Thank you. While she's doing that, I'll just say a little bit, she's quick, about why my office has started working on this, what office I'm in at HUD, and just a little bit of background on this. I'm in our Office of Strategic Planning and Management, and as the name might suggest, that means I'm on the team that writes the strategic plan for HUD. And we set 2-year agency priority goals in addition to those 4-year strategic plans that look at, nowhere like from 2 to 5 priority policy areas that the administration is really focusing on for 2 years. For FY16 and 17, we identified education and increasing educational attainment as one of those agency priority goals. And that means it will have a couple of years of pretty heavy focus. We have quarterly kind of data review and problem solving and agenda setting meetings to really understand how we can track our progress in this policy area on a kind of global national scale, lifting up and really understanding a lot more of the work that you guys are already doing in local communities, and then set both agendas and actions and really identify places where we can better coordinate with the federal partners, with local communities, and just be a little bit more strategic about our work as a whole. The 4 slides I have here are really adapted from the first data, we call them HUD stats, if any of you have ever heard of them or participated in them. First quarterly dive we did into the FAFSA and HUD, or FSA and HUD data match. And so I've tried to adapt that as appropriately as possible for this audience and have some things that I'll point out throughout specific to CLPHA members. But here is just really what we have been referring to internally as the baseline data, the first time that we're really getting on a global scale. How many of our residents, in the recent FAFSA cycles, which are all we can access, are applying for FAFSA, are going on to enroll in college? How many are eligible for loans and grants and taking those out and really hopefully start a conversation around where we should focus our attention to support those higher education attainment and to really message to our residents that this is a possibility for them. So the first kind of breakdown here, I think the HUD regions should mean something to you all. This is one that we really use. I hope I'll also highlight how we work with our senior leadership and our regional leadership to really show the data in a local context as well. And so we have the data here in each region. We looked at 17 to 34-year-olds, how many of them were applying for the FAFSA, and then how many were receiving aid each year. And we've got this, local breakdown. Overall, we thought it was 27% of all of our residents aged 17 to 34 were completing a FAFSA, and 18% of them were going on to receive aid. We were using a disbursement as a proxy for enrollment. So about 20% of our 17 to 34-year-olds are currently enrolled in school. I'll say a couple things that I want to be very aware of the limitations of this data at this point. And this was looking at our FY15 tenant records. So anyone from October of 2014 to September of 2015 who was in HUD-assisted housing in age 17 to 34. We looked for their records in the 2015 to 2016 FAFSA cycle. So that starts in January 2015 and goes through, I believe, June of 2016. And so this is not going to tell you all of your residents who have ever applied for school, who have ever attended school. This does not tell you residents who are not accessing school without federal aid. This is merely telling you kind of a snapshot of who's applying for FAFSA now. And we see it's a pretty high number. There are some things that, we have definitely identified as kind of next steps to understand where are kids eligible, where are high school graduation rates higher or lower, if there's some match, if there are lessons we can learn from places that have really focused on increasing these numbers. You can see here Region 9 is particularly high, and that's our, California, Nevada, Arizona, and Hawaii, a couple other areas. Lots of obvious theories there of a great, state school system, but a lot of other things that we are still looking to explore and would love recommendations for what you may think are driving any of the trends I show here and some ways that we can really capitalize on this data. So that's the high level. I'll go into a couple of then more specific analyses that we could do. We had the great privilege for working with CLPHA to get PHA-specific data for those that were large enough to actually have a necessary, sample size, enough kids 17 to 34, residents 17 to 34, who were showing up in any of the data matches that we could, securely disclose data on them without risking any privacy concerns. And because of just the natural size of all your members, we were able to actually get that data specific to every housing authority in CLPHA. I've submitted that list to Abra, so she has that data if you are curious about where you stand and the whole range of CLPHA members. But what I've identified here are the top 10 and the lowest 10 among your residents 17 to 34 who were actually applying for FAFSA. So that completed column is what they are being ranked on or how they are being grouped right now. And again, really seeing a high number of the California housing authorities among there, as well as a few, the North Carolina, New Jersey there, and then the group in the bottom. Again, not dramatically different numbers, but definitely just some trends that we were seeing. Pennsylvania and Ohio were repeatedly among, even in the much, much larger sample, among the bottom group. So definitely some interesting trends to explore. The thing that was really, I'd like to highlight here, though, is the received. So here, I'm showing the data in a slightly different way than I did on the first slide, where we were looking again among all 17 to 34-year-olds. Here, I'm just looking at how many of those who apply for FAFSA then go on to actually receive assistance. We saw nationally that number was 67%, and then what I've showed you for those top 10 and bottom 10 is their PHA-specific number. There's a little variation there, but generally we're seeing that these are pretty consistently high and really suggesting that merely completing a FAFSA is a pretty good predictor of a resident's future enrollment in higher education. We're using this as a really big impetus for our regional administrators and our local and field staff to engage their housing authorities around higher education work and FAFSA and completion assistance, really reaching kids at a younger age, 14, 15, before, if they are not on a college track that's already determined for them, so that they can understand that the FAFSA is, federal aid is a great resource to ensure that they can afford school. And we found also in this baseline data, I don't have it here on the slide, but that 95% of all HUD-assisted residents were Pell eligible. I'm sure this isn't really surprising for this group. Pell eligibility based on a family's income. It makes a lot of sense that our residents can then get these grants that they do not have to pay back like the direct loans. And in just my kind of exploratory review, we see in many communities that those grants can be as high as almost $6,000 and don't have to be paid back. So we're using this as really one of the focal points for how we can make college a feasible, approachable idea for many residents who currently don't think of it as that. Really ensuring that they know about the resources that are available to them. In many cases, this $5,815, which was the highest award number I saw, could really cover the total cost of a 2-year technical training program with such assistance. And we're doing a lot of messaging in partnership with FSA, or the Federal Student Aid of the Department of Education, to really make sure they know that and that we're targeting our residents with that kind of outreach. The next 2 slides are a little less interesting, but I think still really interesting. We looked at variation in both application and aid receipt across our programs. Didn't really see a great deal of difference between housing choice vouchers, public housing, and then our multifamily portfolio. That data is what you're seeing here. Really similar, but just something we wanted to see if something one group was really reaching out about more, but that case wasn't suggested. But then the really interesting one, we also looked at the age cohorts here for seeing where we saw the highest proportion of residents applying for FAFSA, and exploring where our residents may fall with against the traditional, I use that term loosely, but traditional student population. And here we saw our residents are indeed a little bit older. We think of that 17 to 20 as your typical first-time college student age group. While we had a pretty high proportion of those residents applying for FAFSA, we saw a significantly higher proportion of our 21 to 24-year-olds, over 36% of that group, were applying for financial aid, and then a quarter, or about 25%, were then receiving aid. So validating that we may need to target and reach out to a slightly different group of residents than our traditional college engagement, financial aid engagement efforts might have pointed us to, and making sure that we are doing our outreach to really reach the greatest number of people. And so that was, and this has fostered a lot of additional work that I'm not the expert on, but can certainly connect you to throughout our office, both with the Project SOAR-NOFA that I hope many of you are exploring, that closes on September 28th in our public and Indian housing program that will fund up to 6 PHAs, educational navigators, to focus on this higher educational attainment, FAFSA completion, financial literacy around student aid. It's fostered a lot of our, I think the FAFSA experiments that Calvin Johnson at HUD in our PDR shop may have presented before. I don't know. I may ask Abra for confirmation there.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Summer.
Cool. Awesome. So that was, all of this data predates what Calvin's experiment has done, and has, I really think, informed a lot more of the steps moving forward about how we can better target our experiments and our outreach, and again, just really reach the greatest number of our residents. So I think that's it for my presentation, but I see that there are some questions coming through, and I will hand it back to Abra or someone to help me go through these. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of questions. I think everyone wants to know what is their particular housing authority's rate, and I think Abra's already working on getting that distributed out according to each agency. So that was sort of the bulk of the chat. But David did have a just clarifying question regarding slides 1 and 2. Could you go over the difference in received rates presented on 1 and 2? And he said that he thought you heard they were saying from different populations. I guess they just want to clarify, like, who. As I understood it, that the received aid is those that have gone ahead. You do not only apply, but you have actually enrolled in school and are utilizing that aid as part of your college experience, correct?
Correct. So I want to say the numerator, for data-minded folks, I'm a data analyst here, the numerator is going to be the same in both groups. It's going to be all of your 17 to 34-year-olds who have received aid, had a disbursement in this FAFSA cycle, and that went towards school. It wasn't just that they enrolled and got a packet and were deemed eligible, but that they actually took the money out. The denominator in in the first slide, the slide that I have up in the webinar now, is all 17 to 34-year-olds. The denominator on the second slide in these received columns are just the number of residents who actually applied for FAFSA. It's removing everyone who, all the 17 to 34-year-olds who we didn't find in the FAFSA data, and just looking at if and when you apply for FAFSA, how many of you go on to then enroll in school, because we wanted to see if really just focusing on increasing the number of FAFSA residents, if there would be any, validity to the argument that would then hopefully increase the number of kids going to school or residents going to school. And I think we saw that. So, yeah. And across the board, I think we saw it was surprising when I did the CLPHA specific numbers to have the range that I think we saw here when we looked at the top and bottom for the entire group 1,500 that we were able to get the PHA specific data on. We saw much more consistent numbers among the received rate after you had already applied for FAFSA.
Great.
I see, I got it. Cool, David. I'm glad I'm making some sense. Sometimes I think I'm just rambling.
No, thank you so much. And I think also along the lines of, I know everyone wants to receive their own information on their particular housing authority, but what is the plan to sort of replicate this year over year so that we could use this as like measuring impact?
Sure, yeah. We set up an MOU, really exciting work that took a really long time with the Department of Education for 2 years, two analyses each year. So this was from the match we did in April. We are slated to have another one late fall, early winter that we hope. I just had a big meeting with the Department of Education earlier today and really said I'm going to be working with them to potentially refine what it is that we're asking for and look at some more specific groupings to while this worked really well for you guys, we work with some other trade groups that have smaller housing authorities that we couldn't get every one of their members. We couldn't get some of our big multifamily nonprofit developers because we just hadn't provided the data in that way. We definitely want to get more demographics, so like gender, sex, a couple things that for whatever reason in the initial match we couldn't get very well, and would be really open to any questions or suggestions from you guys about ways that would be helpful to see this data and group it moving forward. This is going to be, a major way for us to measure over time the impact of major outreach work, and it's not necessarily things that we might expect to see change on a national scale in a semi-annual fashion, but definitely for you guys who are amping up these outreach works, I see 60% of you have a scholarship program, so everything, your combined efforts to really make sure our residents realize that higher education is attainable, you may be able to better see in every 6-month time fashion. So I can certainly agree to continue to do this kind of breakdown for the CLPHA members, but if you have any suggestions for just what might be interesting within the bounds of what federal student aid is collecting on a national basis, I'd be really open to hearing those.
Hi, Emily. It's Abra. I think we talked about this when you first presented the data, but I think it may be useful for some of the housing authorities, if it's at all possible, and I know that there are limitations with how the match is happening, but to know a breakdown of how who's applying for aid and then receiving for type of school. So if it's community college versus a 4-year institution or whatever the case may be, I think that could be really useful for a lot of the folks listening.
Yes, that was like a big one that it was a little confusing. We anticipated getting that in our first dive and didn't, and it's definitely left a lot of things open for, again, how we should message this, but we are focused on getting it in the November-December match. So thanks for reminding me. That's a great one.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Feel free to put them in the Q&A or the public chat box. If we can, I think I'd like to go back to that last slide as well, just to make sure people had some time to see that as well. Any other questions?
And while folks are thinking about those and chatting them either with the Q&A in the top or the public chat in the bottom left, I think I responded to everyone, but if you're a CLPHA member and you are already, or someone else on your staff is already on the listserv for the education working group, I did go ahead and add those of you who I have some of your colleagues on. So you will, when the recording is available, when they process it, it usually takes about 24 hours, I will automatically send all of you a follow-up email like we normally do with where you can access the recording on the Google Drive and the copies of the presentations, as well as I will go ahead and attach that Excel file that Emily was referencing that has the breakdowns for you all individually. And that was done through the Housing Authority Code. For those of you who are not CLPHA members or not housing authorities, I think all of you have gone ahead and sent me an email, so I will respond to those individually and share what I'm able. As a preview, I think I've talked to a lot of you about this, but we will soon be launching our new clearinghouse, which part of the very exciting piece of this is to have a repository, to have all of this information in one place. So that is where we will be newly switching to hosting the webinar recordings as opposed to on the group's Google Drive. So stay tuned for more information on how to access and use that site, which will have a lot of other really great features. But for this particular webinar, we will be doing business as usual.
Great, and we have a couple questions. I think they're more posed maybe to the group than necessarily to our presenter. So Alon was focusing, do any other housing authorities have instances where students are being audited by FAFSA more so this year than previous years? As well as Maria also posted another question in regards to community colleges and the Promise program, an issue they had regarding parents not completing the FAFSA. So I think those are probably, I mean, if we have any insights on the call, that is great. If people want to respond in the public chat or reach out to those individuals accordingly, we can go from there. Did your proposal focus any more on FAFSA completion, or you were simply trying to focus this study on the rates of completion and received aid?
So we were really getting, our baseline, like where are we at with our residents on these points. We've partnered, a lot over the last year and a half with federal student aid and spoken to many of these points. And again, well, I'll start there. There's definitely some things that they are doing for this FAFSA cycle. This will be the first year that the FAFSA actually opens in October as opposed to January. And so 2 months earlier, and it'll be an 18-month cycle as opposed to a 16-month cycle to ensure that while kids are actually, I keep saying kids, I apologize, while our residents are still applying for school, they can get some indication of how much aid they are going to get, and so that they don't, in the very rigorous, time-consuming process of filling out applications, if they feel like it has some worth because it's a feasible option for them. And we're hoping should support people to actually complete the FAFSA. Because it's opening so early, they're also doing more to accept at point of the first FAFSA completion and your estimate of how much you will get. They are accepting previous year's tax records. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with like the Mad Dash to get your taxes completed so that you can submit it to FAFSA before May 1 to get priority financial aid secured. We're removing that kind of, or FSA is working to reduce that stress for families and use an estimate based on your previous year's tax records, and then you'll just at a later point, closer to the start of the year, you can actually reconfirm your tax records there. So those are some just high-level efforts that they are doing to make sure it is becoming more accessible and that kids and residents find it easier to complete. I I don't exactly know what the question was by audited by FAFSA more so. I hope that might be that, I don't know if that's referring to just like what tax records they're providing or not, but I might need some greater elaboration there. And then from the FAFSA experiments that Calvin presented on a couple months ago, where we actually saw a pretty increase in residents completing who got a paper application. I thought this was mind-boggling or just surprising, and I take for granted the connectivity that I have that not all of our residents have the same access to, but really I think we saw a statistically significant 6% increase in folks who got a paper application versus those who didn't. And so really seeing that making sure that people know that the FAFSA is available in different formats, and a paper form that they could potentially carry around with them for a few weeks as they complete over time, may be another route to explore, ensuring that, again, this becomes accessible to kids and residents. So those are my responses to that, but happy to think through this more and then definitely connect you to people at HUD who are really getting into the nitty-gritty of how we make this actionable.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Any final questions? Feel free to put them in.
So while folks may be thinking of some final questions, again, we'll keep sending this out through the working group listserv, which is for CLPHA members, but also for the newsletter. It's great that we've had some outside partners join us. This is the first time that we're opening this series up. So the next one will be on November 22nd at 2 p.m. Eastern, focused on intergovernmental partnerships. So stay tuned for more details about the presenters. If you yourself are interested in presenting on that or any of the future webinar topics, touch with Cassie or myself. But are there any other questions? What will that webinar include? Details to TBD, Courtney. So certainly if I know Cassie and I have some ideas about what that might include, but if there are specific things that anybody would like to see for a webinar about intergovernmental partnerships, again, please be in touch with Cassie or myself. We want this to be of use for everyone on this webinar and future participants. So if there's something you'd really like to hear more about or share more about, then we would like to hear from you about that.
Yeah, just to back that up, we discussed it in terms of focus on educational, obviously, intergovernmental partnerships. How are you as a housing authority working around education issues within other agencies to move your goals forward? So that could take the shape of partnerships with school districts, could take the shape of partnership with other anchor institutions. So we'll keep moving that forward. And then Eli, Stacy came up with one more question. With the data leaning more towards 21 to 24, utilizing FAFSA, would you suggest more resources be directed to this age group? So is there some idea of already using this data to target action?
Yeah, I would definitely say I don't want to say anything should happen at the expense of targeting it at all residents and making sure that this is an option for everyone, but I certainly would say this forced us to expand or recognize that we need to look at expanded group and not just, again, your traditional 17 to 20-year-olds, where I think a greater amount of this kind of outreach and education is focused. And so it was really don't just focus on 21 to 24-year-olds, but definitely focus on them more than I think a lot of people are right now. And earlier, this is one we definitely want to keep exploring, but it'll definitely take some years of looking at this again and again to see if we start to focus on 14, 15-year-olds now, are we going to see an increase in that 17 to 20 number later, 21 to 24-year-old later? How do we distinguish that impact? Things that to still be discovered, but we're also really hoping to push in a younger age group so that, again, kids think that this is accessible much earlier on.
Great, thank you. I also would note that as well. That was sort of one of the things that came to my eyes when I saw that 25 to 34 age group being less likely to receive aid, like the likelihood that they'd already enrolled in college prior and may have some barriers in applying again to actually receive the aid. It may not just be that they didn't enroll in school, but there could be other options as well for that age group in particular.
Yeah, I think there are time limits on Pell Grants, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
It might be 6 years. And then I didn't put it on the slide, but we actually saw a much greater proportion of those age groups, the older age groups, than definitely the 25 to 34-year-olds taking out loans.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could be because they are getting less grants. It could be because it's just their cost of life is increased as 25-year-olds and 34-year-olds. So again, more questions to explore there, but that was an interesting trend we saw in the baseline.
And then David included one more question in regards to, do we have a sense for how the completion rates for low-income students in general compared to the public housing data? Is that information you have, or maybe Abra, is that information that we know?
If Abra's going to take it first.
Sure. Well, I know that Emily has information on the national average for applications. I don't know how this compares. I do hear from other groups around other data points, like attendance, for instance, that housing authority residents are faring worse than other low-income students, even if they're at the same school or living in the same neighborhood, which I think is really, really interesting. But I don't have any specific statistics for FAFSA. Emily, I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, so it's what I've gotten has been in limited fashions from FSA, and it's really been based off of work they're already doing, and they're doing very local, specific, targeted efforts at really trying to test the impacts of outreach in just a handful of areas. And so when I got the similar rates for, I think it was 15 communities and it was low-income residents. They should be a general peer cohort. We saw a pretty big range among those. The lowest I think I saw in any of those was 22%, and it was actually, I think, in Camden, New Jersey, and then it went as high as like 44%, but those were all, it's hard because they were targeting areas with low completion rates, so it just, I think it biased the sample that they were looking at, but there were definitely some peer agencies that we saw, or communities with very similar populations to our public housing authorities, and saw that they had similar rates. So we should do some more rigorous work, and I should continue to kind of push with federal student aid a little bit more to get a good peer comparison for our residents without any of those biases. And so thank you for flagging, but I don't have the full range right now.
Were there any final burning questions? I think there was a lot of really great information today, and I know that we don't necessarily always have the answers, but I think it's really wonderful that Emily and some of the other folks on her team are working on this, and that your input can help them perhaps focus on some of the things they may be able to do in the future.
Yeah, I didn't put it anywhere. I don't know if you're going to circulate it, Abra. I can put it in the chat if that's the best place, but certainly can put my email out, and happy to email, call, anything for some follow-up related to this, if that would be helpful.
Sure.
You tell me. Okay.
If you want to throw your email into the public chat, I'm sure folks would appreciate that. Kathy,
there it is.
That came through?
Yep, that came through.
Okay,
great.
So thanks so much to our presenters, Elon from Atlanta Housing Authority, Emily from HUD. If you do find that you have questions after the fact, please be in touch with myself or Cassie or either of the presenters directly. They're here to help. So we really appreciate the robust participation this morning, I guess this afternoon, this morning for you West Coast folks. And I think, Cassie, anything else that you wanted to add?
No, that's it from me. Thank you all so much.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks.